Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's program, The Ever-Flowing Eno. I'm Jenny Levine with Durham County Library, and this program is a partnership with the Eno River Association. It is being recorded and will be available on the Eno River website shortly. I am very pleased to introduce Dave Cook, who is the Education Coordinator for the Eno River Association. Dave was a North Carolina State Park Ranger for 30 years, 16 of them as the Superintendent of Eno River State Park. You can find out lots more about the Eno from their website, enoriver.org. Please help me welcome Mr. Dave Cook.
And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope that we have a good time this afternoon, but it is also a beautiful day on the Eno. So what I really hope is after we finish up here that everybody gets up and goes out and hikes a trail. You'll really appreciate doing that on such a beautiful day. So Jenny told you a little bit about who I am. Just tell you a little bit more. I am a North Carolina native. I'm an Orange County native. I grew up around here and went to Chapel Hill High School and NC State University. But my exposure to the river started really back in the 70s with the Boy Scouts and camping on the Eno. And so I remember those of you who go out to Fuse Ford at the state park and you park down there by the picnic area and you see this big field with cedar trees out there, that was a cow pasture when I was camping. That was not state park. And we camped in the pasture with the cows. And what was really cool in those days was that back then the Duke Power Company had all their big power line easements that crossed the river. They had these two cable bridges, and if you've never been across a two cable bridge, you have a high wire and a low wire, and you put your feet on the low wire and you grab the top wire with your hands, and that was put there so that the maintenance guys on the power lines could get across the river. But it was great for Boy Scouts who loved to scoot across those things as well. So I had very early origins on the river. I did come to the state park in 1993 as the superintendent, which is just a fancy way of saying the head ranger of the park. Enjoyed that thoroughly, and then went on from there to Hanging Rock State Park. Was there 4 years, and then I turned to the dark side and went to the Raleigh offices and was in management for state parks for 3 years. And then I retired from that and was blessed that it timed out very well that the Eno River Association was looking for an education coordinator. The Eno is very dear to my heart. I love doing education, so I jumped on that opportunity. So that's me. So you sort of know where I'm coming from. But what I really want to tell you about is the Eno. And I want to start by telling you two tales. And these events were things that happened on the Eno that were shaped by things that happened long, long ago. And sort of to see how they're connected together, how our past connects us to what's happening today. So I'm going to tell you two tales. One of them is a tale of tragedy, and one of them is a tale of joy. So starting with the tale of tragedy, it was February of 2007, and I was a ranger at the state park. And at about 10 till 6, which we used to close the park at 6 o'clock at night, lock up the gate, a beautiful 19-year-old girl drove into the park, parked her car, and walked down to the river. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but we found out subsequent investigation that she was having problems, boy problems. She was very distraught. She went down to the river, for those of you who know the Eno Trail, stood on a little bridge at dark, took off everything she was wearing, jewelry, shoes, socks, everything, piled them very neatly, folded up on the little trail bridge, walked into the river and drowned in water that she could stand up in, 3-4 feet deep, forced herself to drown. We still don't know how that happened. No drugs in her system, no alcohol in her system. Why did she come to the Eno? She had grown up in the neighborhood. She loved the river. She came to the place she loved, but in the end, it was a tragedy. The second event, the one of joy I want to tell you about, happened actually about 8 years earlier. I was the lead search and rescue instructor for North Carolina State Parks for a long time, teaching people how to find people lost in the woods, which is a skill we would teach our rangers. And we would lead these week-long courses to introduce the rangers, new rangers, to search and rescue. And so in 1999, in November, we were doing an overnight training as part of that week-long class down there at the Eno River State Park. We were actually hanging around the group camp in the swinging bridge. And two of those rangers, as the training winded down around midnight, a young man and a young lady ended up standing out on the bridge talking all night. They never went, we had tents, we were camping out. They never went to their tent, stayed camping all night. A year later, they were married. And that's what the Eno does to you. And that is not the only story of people meeting on the Eno and getting married. So we have a tale of tragedy. We have a tale of joy. So what binds these together? Well, it was the events that happened long before. One of these events took hundreds of millions of years. See, there was a time there was not an Eno River. There was a time the world was very different. The rocks and geology of the Eno River date back more than 600 million years. The river wasn't there at that time. The North Carolina Geological Survey tells us that the river is probably between 2.5 and 5 million years old. In our time, that's amazing. In geological time, it's still very young. It was formed because the rocks, when they were made through volcanic activity, formed a sort of west to east grain. And that sort of leads to our west to east grain direction of the Eno River. Now, you also, if you know the river, know it makes these incredible bends. If you look around Cox Mountain, all of a sudden it takes a hard turn to the right and heads south. That's an old fault line, more geology. So the first of our events that had to happen was we had to have the river. It had to be created. And so those foundations allowed for our things to happen. The Piedmont itself, that what we call the Piedmont itself, began to form. And then the river itself, of course, first just water finding a way to go. It eventually erodes out and creates this river. So that was the big event. But the next event actually happened a lot of years later. I want to look at August of 1966. In August of 1966, a bunch of people in this area woke up, picked up their Durham Morning Herald, and read in the newspaper that they were going to build a dam on the Eno River. Now, actually, this shouldn't have been a surprise because this had been in the works for decades, but it was fueled by some impending residential development interfering with the future of that dam. So that sped the city of Durham up to building this dam. Now, this upset people that lived on the river and used the river. And so very quickly, 13 of them got together in a living room over on a little piece of property that's now actually surrounded by the state park, and said, well, we got to do something about this. We can't let the river be dammed. Within 2 weeks, they were at a Durham City Council meeting, 9 of those people protesting the river. And that was the beginnings of the Eno River Association. Now, I'm going to tell you more about how that all played out. And of course, that led to the eventual creation of the Eno River State Park. If the river hadn't been formed, if the state park had never been created, then the tragedy of the drowning or the joy of the wedding would have never have happened. And so that's how we tie these events together, the things of the past coming to join us in the future. So let me tell you a little bit about the river as a whole, where it begins, where it goes. It is actually 33 miles in length. It starts at what we now call the Confluence Natural Area, which is a more than 200-acre piece of property that the Eno River Association owns and manages. And we have that open to the public with trails. The two creeks, the West Fork and the East Fork, come together and form the Eno River. And from there, it travels on down to where it joins the Flat River in Durham County. And then on the Flat River, it becomes the Neuse. So those are the 33 miles. Now, you'll often hear times that it is 40 miles long. And what that's counting in is the length of the two creeks that feed it, the West Fork and the East Fork. So if you count the whole watershed, yeah, it's more than 40 miles long. If I look down anybody, I've just got an outline. I'm just trying to make sure I stay on track and don't get too sidetracked on the things that y'all want to know about. So this is where the river is. So let's talk about some of the earliest history, the first people that came here, the first people that saw the river, which would have been an amazing sight. Just think about it, if you were among the first Americans the Native Americans that showed up and saw this incredibly scenic, what we now call Eno River. Well, we know from archaeology that people were here maybe up to 12,000 years ago. And we know that because we find the stone and implements that they left behind. And there are a bunch of archaeological sites on the river. Many of those sites were prior to any European colonization. So we don't really know who actually lived there. We don't know any tribal names or anything like that because they predate. They would be there for a while, probably use up most of their resources, move on and create another site. So it wasn't until the Europeans came that we actually got an idea of who was occupying it. And the first time we really know about that was 1672. John Lederer, who was a German explorer, encountered the Eno and Shikori about 14 miles apart here on the Eno. And the Eno and Shikori had always traveled together. History tells us they probably migrated from South Carolina sometime after the late 1500s. But again, a lot of stuff wasn't written down, so we don't know. But we hear about them again in 1701 when John Lawson, and a lot more people know about John Lawson, when he explored the Carolinas in the winter of 1701. And he came up this way and he walked the river and he found the Eno and the Shikori here as well. And we actually learned about a whole nother character at that point, which was Eno Will. And Eno Will shows up a number of times in in Eno River lore as a prominent Indian during that time. We also know that at that time, the Occaneechi occupied this area, and that is the one village site we can actually say this is where they were. And that's because of archaeology. So over in the Bend in Hillsboro, in a large grassy field, is a big archaeology site. There are actually multiple village sites there. So we know several different times that was occupied, and it makes sense. It's a great little farming spot. It's right on the river where you could get water. And so, but based on artifacts on one site, we can say this is the Occaneechi village. Now, if you go to Hillsboro and see the palisade that's up now, the demonstration village, that's not on the site. They didn't want to disturb the archaeology, but it is a demonstration of what was built. It was built in replication of what archaeology has shown that palisade looked like and what those homes would have looked like there. So it is a fascinating thing to go see. So these Indians were here, and then what happened to them? Well, of course, most of us know that the diseases brought by the European colonists really had a devastating effect. There was also aggression. That's how the Occaneechi ended up here, is because of European aggression. They migrated to the Eno. By 1712, most of the Native Americans were gone from this area. There was an effort to move most of them to Fort Christiana in Virginia. And so for a while there was a lack of occupation, but to say they were gone is in error because there were some that remained behind and there were some that came back. And for the next couple of 100 years, the Native Americans were still here and still in our community, but mostly under the radar. And if you want to learn more about them, I first of all say there's a lot of good resources out there, but I just want to put this one plug in. We are coming out with the next Eno River Journal in February. It's called Ribbons of Color. We haven't done one in 20 years, but this one is focused on the people of color and their lives on the Eno, and includes those particularly of the Occaneechis who have contributed to this journal. So be watching for that coming out. Now, so as the colonists started coming in, they of course needed the same things that the Native Americans did: good farmland, good water. So the Eno was their source. It wasn't like today where you could be miles away and pump your water there. You had to be close. The town of Hillsboro sprang up. People began to colonize this area. Now, I'm not going to tell you about all the colonists, but I do want to tell you about one family, just so that you can sort of get the gist of what was going on with the earliest people that got there. One of the prominent families early on in our history were the Few family. So in autumn of 1758, the Few family settled on the banks of the Eno. They came from up north and they established a tilt hammer mill. So if you've been to the Few's Ford access of Eno River State Park, that is who the fort is named after, is the Fews. Now they eventually left there and they moved to a plantation adjacent to what's now Airmount at Hillsboro. So if you've been to the historical house Airmount in Hillsboro, they were just next door to that. And if you haven't been, I highly encourage you to go visit. It is a neat place. Last time I checked their website, they are doing small tours. So be sure and check about scheduling that and going to see that. All right, so the Fews are living now next to Airmount in Hillsborough, and they got on the bad side of the royal governor. James Few got caught up in the formation of the regulators, but the bigger issue with the Few family was they did not want to convert to the Anglican denomination, which was, of course, the Church of England. This was not accepted well with those in power. The regulators were, we got to remember everybody was British citizens at that time, but they were upset with the abusive manner of enforcement of regulations. They were upset with unjust sheriffs that were managing things. So there was a growing protest movement beginning in 1766. And eventually these regulators numbered in the thousands. And they got very discouraged over the failure of finding peaceful means to get justice. So they turned to things that we probably would frown on. They turned to basically going through terrorism and lawlessness and tearing things up and tearing down houses and ransacking. They refused to pay fees, and they terrorized anybody who was administering the law. They disrupted court proceedings, and this led to a riot in 1770 in the town of Hillsborough. So the governor decided he had to respond to this, and I'm leading to where the Fews come back into this. So he sent troops there at the urging of the colony to suppress the regulators. Key to that was there was a regulation that put in place that you had to answer a court summons within 60 days, and that plays into this. So in May of 71, Tryon and his troops left from Newbern. They marched to Hillsborough and they actually set up a camp on Alamance Creek, which is now the Alamance Battleground Historic Site, which I also encourage you to visit. It's a neat place. They were 5 miles away from the regulators. On May 16th, his 1,000 soldiers met 2,000 regulators. But I'm going to tell you, trained soldiers are a whole lot better than untrained farmers and merchants. And so they pretty much squashed the regulators at that time. 61 let's see here, 9 soldiers and 61 soldiers were killed and wounded. The regulators lost 9 people, and their injuries were a whole lot greater, but we really don't know their exact numbers because the British Army only kept up with their numbers. Now, they took prisoners. 6 of those prisoners were taken to Hillsborough and in subsequent days were hung. 1 prisoner was hung before they left the site, and that was James Few, the Fews Ford. And the story was, there's various stories about why he's hung. One was under the pretext that he had not reported the court summons within 60 days, and that was used as the reason for hanging him. Another was that he refused to sign an oath of allegiance that all the regulators had to sign to get a pardon. But there was also a rumor that he gave the British Army such a fit during the fight that to satisfy the soldiers, they had to go ahead and hang him as well. He did leave behind a widow and 3-month-old twins, which is very sad. But the punishment wasn't over. So they hung James, but as further punishment to the Fews, Tryon's army went back to Hillsborough. They camped on the Fews plantation. They let all the livestock wander into planted fields, and they just ruined everything. So the Fews moved to Georgia. They left town. From there, James' brother William became an original signer of the U.S. Constitution from Georgia. So from living on the Eno River to signing the U.S. Constitution. And then 130 years later, James Few's great-grandson, who was also a William, became the first president of Duke University. So they came back home. So this was just one family that occupied it, but you see we had a big impact on the world around us here on the Eno. We were early frontier, and it became very important. Now, I want to mention the early industry that also brought people to the Eno. Over time, there were more than 30 mills that operated on the river. Now, of course, many of you probably visited West Point Mill, which is a restored mill. It's one that the Eno River Association actually restored back in the 1970s. But there were many other mills, and you can still find the remains of those on the trails. And from those, we get many prominent names from the early history of Durham and Orange County: the Cades, the Coles, Guest, McCowan, Sennett. All of these people were very important in establishing what became this community here, and we still see their names as we are around our community. But I want to point out something else that often gets overlooked with these people. They are given a lot of credit for what they accomplished, but during that time frame, pre-Civil War, a lot of the actual physical work was being done by their enslaved persons, the persons on their farms and plantations. And those people are still here too. When you go back into the parklands of the Eno, you find many unmarked grave sites. Sometimes they will have a headstone or a footstone, but no inscription. In some cases, they may only a few hundred yards from where you have a very nice cemetery with headstones. Those were the masters, the unmarked are the slaves. So they're still laying in our grounds, and I contend that the people that are buried in those unmarked graves are just as important to what we've become as the people that are in the marked graves. So I told you earlier, when I talked about the two events that need to happen so we can have our stories of tragedy and our stories of joy, that I was going to tell you a little bit more about how the Eno River Association came back, what we did, how we came back to save the river. So you have to know a few things. So we do know that in 1966, the building of a dam on Eno, which had been just upstream from Guest Road, was hot item. Durham needed water. Durham recognized it was growing. It recognized if it didn't do something quickly, it was going to lose the land it intended on the Eno in order to build that dam. So the Eno River Association formed, and you know, what did they do? They did exactly what we're doing right now. They got out in the community and started telling people what a wonderful resource we have right here. And so many people just weren't aware of it. And so they started leading hikes out here, wildflower hikes, scenery hikes. They took rafting trips down the river. They made slideshows and the old carousel slide projectors and went out to civic organizations. And you know what happened is people started saying, wow, this is a really cool place. And you know, familiarity, you know, especially with such a beautiful place, started breeding a caring attitude. And people the tide started shifting to a larger and larger number of people that wanted to save the river. The fight for West Point on the Eno came about because Urban Industries was planning on doing a big development on the area over there on Roxborough Road, and they did eventually do the Riverside Shopping Center. But when the park that we know now, the campus that we know now at West Point with all the historic buildings, they had planned on developing that as well. But the Eno River Association fought very hard and convinced them not to do that. And it led in 1972 to a 30-acre donation to what's now the main campus of West Point on the Eno. So that was really kind of our first big success at saving the Eno. Now, at first, the association was just trying to stop the dam. But being farsighted, they realized that they couldn't just stop the dam, that the development was going to keep coming. If we were going to have this Eno River Valley, we had to do more. So they set on a mission of convincing the state of North Carolina to create an Eno River State Park. And that meant bringing the officials out here and just showing them what a treasure we had, getting in with the right politicians, becoming very savvy with it, and they did. So in 1972, not only did West Point get created, but the state of North Carolina declared there would be an Eno River State Park. Now, it was actually another year before they got any land for the state park. But in 73, the city gave up the idea of the dam. They sold that land that they had already taken through eminent domain for the reservoir. They sold that to the state to start the beginnings of the state park. Now, you might think things are great and rosy then, but actually, here's the deal. I said a lot of people did jump on board and said, we got to save the Eno. But there were a lot of people that were completely against it, particularly people that were landowners along the Eno, particularly in Orange County. There was a lot of hostility. They looked at state park coming in as government intrusion. The government's going to come in, they're going to take our land, and when they do, all kinds of ne'er-do-wells and lowlifes. I won't even use the descriptions that you can still find in historic records of the people they described would be coming out to the Eno. But they really fought this hard. Now, the state, meanwhile, as they're beginning to get lands for the state park and doing the proper thing, they start planning a master plan. We're going to, have a master plan for this park. I mean, at one point they're talking about going from Hillsborough all the way to the Flat River and creating this great linear park. But in the end, they developed a master plan of 8,000 acres, so a very large wilderness park here on the Eno. There were landowners, though, in Orange County that said they were just so adamantly opposed to this that they took it to court. And the premise was that if you put my land in a plan, you're taking my land. And they took this all the way to the state Supreme Court. They lost every which way, and they went all the way to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court said, this is not exactly their words, this is my paraphrasing. This is silly. Putting land in a plan is not taking your land. Nobody's actually taking your land away. But there were ramifications from that court case. As part of it, the state of North Carolina told Orange County they would only use eminent domain for critical pieces of property for the Eno River State Park. So that sort of limited. Plus, they also pared that 8,000 acre master plan down to about 1,500 acres. Now, that plan has since been modified because, as you've probably figured out, the Eno River State Park is overwhelmingly popular now. But I will say this, one of those landowners that lost the court case never lost his bitterness to the Eno. And for years afterwards, after losing that court case, he would actually show up protesting with signs at Eno meetings. He would take out, this is not an exaggeration, he would take out advertisements in papers calling for the lynching of Eno River officers. This was an obsession of his for a long time. So, and even then it took a long time for people to realize it. But here's what happened. When I was walking the trails as a ranger at the Eno, and of course then now we're in the 90s and the 2000s, this actually happened multiple times. I would be stopped by somebody, usually somebody of some age, and they would stop and say hello and they say, back when all this state park started, I was totally against it. I thought it was a terrible idea. But we didn't understand what was coming. And we are so glad now that this has been saved. So we have completely changed the attitude for people coming. Our attitude is so much better. So let me say a little bit about, we've saved the Eno to some degree. We're not done yet, and I'm going to come back to that, but we've made a lot of progress. But why? Why is the Eno so important? I mean, we know people love it, so that's good reason right there in itself. But let's just say a few things. First of all, I can't tell where all of y'all are from, but if you're watching from Raleigh, heck, if you've ever been to Raleigh and taken a drink of water, you were drinking the Eno. So how important is the Eno? If you live in Hillsborough and you get water out of the public water supply, you are drinking the Eno. I left Durham out. Durham, you only have to worry about it in an emergency. You've got Lake Mickey and the Little River Reservoir, but you've got an emergency outtake on the Eno, and that's how they're planning on filling up the Tier Quarry for your emergency water as well. So how clean do you want the water to be? How important is that river for you? It is a drinking water source. But probably what most of us think about is our quality of life. What does it mean to us to be able to walk the trails, fish the river, see the wildlife, see the scenery, be in the fresh air? And we've really not learned about that here since COVID came in, because outdoors is one of the safest places to be, where we can spread out and enjoy ourselves. And we've seen that in the just huge numbers of people that have been visiting the Eno parks since March. But let's see, why else is important? Scenery. I mean, it is such a gorgeous place, and they're just everywhere you look, so much to see. Recreation, you've got so much available to you. Most of us go on the hiking trails, but we have camping and fishing and picnicking and educational programs, all of those available to us. But it's not just about the people too. And I will contend that the wild beasts of the Eno are important to us as well. I like to tell people this. When, God told Noah, put all the animals on the ark. He said, put 2 of every kind. I do not, as I read through my book of Genesis, see a footnote that says, except. And so it seems to me that every kind of critter is important. And so in the Eno, we are protecting a lot of habitat for a lot of creatures, and that's what they need. You know, as we look at animals, species that are struggling, habitat loss is the major reason why. And we've got a lot of habitat. We have some cool critters in the Eno. We've got a bass called the Roanoke bass that is only found in the Neuse and the Tar River systems, except for where it's been now planted a little bit into the Cape Fear. But native to those, it's a really neat bass. You can catch it as a game fish. It's got some special regulations. So if you go fishing for it, be sure you look those up at first. But kind of neat that we have our own bass here. We have got several animals that are actually either, well, that are rare. I'll say that. And I'll sort of explain that a little further. Right now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is working on getting endangered species listings for two of those animals. The Neuse River water dog, which is a big old salamander that's found in the river. And we see them in there. They're not real common. They're hard to find. They are in there. And the Carolina Mad Tom, which is a little bitty catfish, about 4 inches long, sort of zebra striped. You know, it's only was found in the Eno that we know of that was recorded one time. It is found further down the Neuse. But here's what's neat about what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is looking into. They have to identify critical habitat. And that's like places, all right, where can we put populations of this? Now, this can get controversial if you're a landowner and somebody wants to put endangered species on your property, because then all of a sudden the government's going to come in and tell you what you can and can't do with your property. But here's what's cool about the Eno. We have protected more than 20 miles of it, so that it's not affecting anybody's private property rights if we use the Eno to bring back the Carolina Mad Tom. Why is it called a Mad Tom? Some of you probably know this. Some of you may have experienced by accident. Now, if you've ever fished for catfish, you're aware they have some pretty sharp fins. And I learned as a youngster the hard way how quickly they can cut you. The thing about a Mad Tom, and there's several species of them, is that they have a spine on their dorsal fin that's got a little bit of venom in it. And it is extremely painful to be cut by a Carolina Mad Tom. Right now in the Eno, we have lots of margin Mad Tom. So there's a little one in there. So they are still there, but I don't hear too many people getting into any kind of trouble with them. They're up for listing. Now there's another rare species that unfortunately is not, the panhandle pebble snail. The panhandle pebble snail, it lives on a special plant in the river called riffleweed. Riffleweed only grows on fast-moving water over rocks. So it grows on the rocks, it's fast-moving water goes over it. So the riffleweed needs a specific spot. The panhandle pebble snail needs a specific spot. And they all need that to survive. The panhandle pebble snail currently is only known in the Eno River. At least I haven't heard anything recently, because up until a few years ago, it had previously been known in some places in Virginia, but hadn't been found in a long time. So the only confirmed area we know of is the Eno. If something happened to the Eno, we would lose the panhandle pebble snail. Now, the pebble snail is about the size of a pencil lead. It is tiny, but to sort of quote Dr. Seuss, a person's a person, no matter how small. And look back at Noah. He was told to get 2 panhandle pebble snails. He wasn't told to leave any behind. So every creature out there is important. And that's another reason the Eno is important. We've had some success stories on the Eno with wildlife too. We've seen some things come and some things come back. Beavers were extirpated from North Carolina and brought back. And now we're very fortunate. They are all over the Eno. We have those back. When I was the superintendent of the Eno River State Park, I would sometimes get calls from landowners who were concerned because the beavers were eating their trees, and they wanted to know what could be done with them. Well, I knew what they wanted me to say is, "Oh, we'll come get them and put them in the river." Well, you can't do that. One's illegal in North Carolina to move beavers, but also beavers are territorial. So if we threw your beavers in with the park's beavers, they would not get along, and some of them get chased out and they'd be right back on your private property because that's where they need to go. But we do have beavers. That's a success story. Turkeys, the Wildlife Commission has gotten a great population of turkeys started back, and it's terrific to walk around the Eno and see so many turkeys. And then we've had a new one come in filling a niche, and that's the coyote. And so a few things about that. I just want to dispel any rumors. The state of North Carolina did not stock any coyotes. They didn't need to. The coyotes figured it out all by themselves. They migrated from the western part of the United States. Our coyotes tend to be a little bigger than the ones out west. That's because they crossbred with wolves, and there's actually some crossbreeding with dogs. So if you take the genetics of our coyotes, you will find some of the DNA of wolves and domestic dogs in there, which resulted in a larger coyote. We've actually run into a lot of people that are fearful of them. I have no fear of a coyote whatsoever. They turn and run first opportunity. The only fear is if you've got very small pets, because they can look at that as prey. So you just have to be careful. Keep your dogs on a leash when you're on the Eno trails. Don't let them wander off. You know, no coyote is going to bother them if you sit there yelling at the coyote. They're going to be too scared of you to do that. So they're filling a niche that was lost when we lost our other big predators, which were wolves. So red wolves would have been our native predator. So we didn't have any kind of predator like that for a very long time. But now the coyotes have filled that gap in. And the last thing I want to mention, I'm talking about the importance of the Eno, is the economic importance. I bet a lot of people don't think about that too much. A Duke grad student actually did a study in the early 90s that showed how much more valuable properties were as they approached the state park. So if your property is right on the state park, the property value escalated tremendously, and you could just track that outward. The closer you were, the more valuable your property was. So you know, the property values are driven up to it. The number of people that want to come, or companies wanting to locate. When they're trying to figure out where to locate a company, they look at the quality of life. And if they can look here and see you have this resource for our employees, that's a reason for coming here. So we provide a lot of that beyond just the fact that people, of course, are just buying things like equipment and supplies to come out and camp and hike at the Eno, or they're stopping at the stores on the way there. All of this is just contributing. The Eno is very valuable to our community. It's an incredible asset to us. So Jay, my timer has blacked out. So if I start running too long, you know, wave or something like that, or if I'm not leaving enough time for questions, wave.
Sure. It's 1:37.
Okay.
So maybe another 10 minutes, but I'm going to pause you right there because I had an idea. I was wondering if people out there wanted to, they could type into the chat their favorite Eno Trail. I have new appreciation now for Penny's Bend, having seen it in many different seasons. And I know people love to talk about the festival. So Bob asked that you make sure to mention Margaret Nygaard. Would you like to say a few words about her?
I will say, yeah, and I'm pleased to say that Margaret was my friend. So we go back to the origins of the Eno River Associations. One of those original members was Margaret Nygaard, actually, and her husband Holger, who was very important to this whole effort. And so I will say this: if you are trying to start an organization, especially a nonprofit that has a mission, you need good people helping. You need good people working. But I will tell you the key thing: there has to be one person that decides this is going to be a success and they are going to make it happen. That's just true with any kind of cause that you're involved with. Somebody has to take that leadership role and be dedicated to it. And for the Eno River, that was Margaret Nygaard. She was a volunteer, but took it on like a full-time job from 1966 to her death in 1995. And wonderful woman, very savvy, very smart. And boy, could she suck you in. You know, if you talk to her, she had you sold on the Eno and had a job to do in no time. It's just incredibly charming. And I'm not just talking about everybody around the community. Every governor knew her on a first name basis. I mean, everybody representing us in the state legislature knew her on a first name basis. And one of her favorite phrases coming into them, she'd talk into their office, say, "Oh, there's trouble on the Eno," and proceed to try to get help and support for what we were trying to do. And so, but she was one of a number of giants. I could give you a whole list of people from that era who dedicated an incredible amount of time, resources, their own funds, and their own and savvy to saving the Eno. It was an incredible team effort. but we had to have that leadership in order for that to happen. We lost her. We were actually preparing for the annual meeting of the Eno River Association in 1995 over at the Pleasant Green Community Center. She was supposed to be there and did not arrive. As she was preparing for the meeting, we lost her. So it was a very sad time for us. I will say this, the board of directors at that time, that they had relied on her for so long, but they really stepped up their game for the next year. This is sort of leading exactly into where I was going with this. For the next year, they took on all the stuff that she had been doing and really kept the organization going, but it was a shift for them. And part of that shift was this. They were, of course, people that had jobs and other responsibilities, and they were having a difficulty, of course, being able to maintain the level that we had been doing things. And that's when they first began putting on staff, other than for the Eno River Festival, for the Eno River Association. So let me get into just what the Eno River Association was and is. So we've talked about a little bit of that, but the things that we do. What I'm involved with is education. And that has been a huge part of it, because I go back to what I said all along. We have been using education to bring people to Eno, and they fall in love with it and they want to protect it. And that's what we're going for. So we do our hike series in the winter and spring. We do outreach to schools and organized groups in the general public. We do our camps, Eno River Field Station, I Walk the Eno. So, and these are among many things we offer, public programs. We have a wonderful education staff, because it's me and Antonia Brown, who's here now doing a lot of great programs, and she's here to us through AmeriCorps. We do advocacy, and that's what we started out. So we started out in advocacy, and this differentiates us a lot from other land trusts in that we spend a lot of time going out and doing things to protect the Eno. We take on issues. We took on Eno Drive, which was a major road which was going to border the river and the parks. We take on sewer crossings. At one time, Durham wanted to put more than 20 pipes aerial pipes above the river carrying sewer. We took that on. The Elizabeth Brady Road Bridge in Hillsborough, which I have sat at that intersection sometimes and wish I could cut straight across and have a bridge to go across the river, but there's so many bridges across the river, we decided that was just one too many. Most recently, the advocacy issues we've been dealing with zoning, just trying to protect water quality by not allowing more dense zoning within our watershed. You mentioned the festival. We do the Eno River Festival. That is a fundraiser, but its main purpose is to draw support and attention to the Eno River, and it has been incredibly effective at doing that. And then we're a land conservancy. So we started out in advocacy. We got the state park created, but we realized there's a lot of land that's got to be acquired, and somebody's got to do it. And we come to realize that government can't be leaned on for everything. So we started saving land. As a private organization, we're more nimble than the state. A good example of that is in 1994, I saw an ad in the newspaper for some land for sale on the Eno. And, I don't even know why I was looking at the real estate ads. I couldn't afford any real estate, but I kept seeing this ad, and it was there for weeks and months, and it's there. And I'm thinking, well, it's in the state park, the association, and I'm sure Margaret knows about it. Well, finally, I had to call Margaret, and I called Margaret up, and I said, Margaret, this land's there. Do you know anything about it? She says, no, let me go find out. An hour later, she's calling me back. Dave, it's the Hunt property. They thought we couldn't be fast enough in buying it. They're just trying to sell it to whoever. Well, if they'd waited on the state, that'd have been right. But the Eno River Association is a private organization. As long as we can come up with the money, we can buy something the next day. We can be nimble at saving properties. And then that property eventually became part of the state park. Most recently, showing that nimbleness was protecting the Bacon Quarry, an 88-acre tract, the northernmost tract in the Eno River State Park. They were working on that property when I got here in the 90s. And it took until 2018, but that's because of persistence. And as much as I love, state parks and our state park staff and our land people, they could not devote that kind of time to cultivating a land deal. And so it took the Eno River Association more than 20 years to broker that deal and stuck with it. And that's something we can do. We have evolved. Initially, we were trying to get properties mostly for the state park, helping somewhat with West Point as well. But eventually we learned that there were properties that none of the park systems wanted, but were on the Eno to protect. So now I've mentioned the Confluence Natural Area, but that's just one of a bunch of properties that we manage now to protect the river and so that people can enjoy the river. And we also helped with the creation of Little River Regional Park. And that was an effort that we did in collaboration with a number of partners. And so, and Little River being the biggest tributary to the Eno. How am I doing on time here, Jenny?
You're doing great. Great. Can I stick in a couple quick questions?
Yes, do.
Someone asked, what's the best trail for someone who has trouble walking long distances?
I would suggest, because it's very pretty, about a half-mile long at the Confluence Natural Area, the Shepherd Mill Trail. Very pretty on the river. You go by the old mill site. If you are able to recognize some of the old stonework and earthworks, it's not a mill there anymore, but and nice woods and nice fields that you pass through. So that would be my suggestion. And if you want to find out how to get there, go to the Eno River Association website to the section on what we protect, and you'll find more information about the confluence.
And that was the next question. Is there a map of the whole Eno and its entrances?
No, there is not a single map that does that because you have different first of all, you cover 33 miles, so it may be your scale will be very small. But also you've got different entities that manage the different areas. So we manage the confluence, and then you move downriver, and then Hillsborough and Orange County have parklands around Hillsborough. And then you get to the state park, which is the largest park area. And then once you cross Guest Road, it's city park. And so they have their own map. And then it's actually city park beyond Roxborough Road for a while. And then it becomes federal property as part of Falls Lake and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So all these different entities. The state park has the best maps. And then we've also got maps of the confluence. And there are some available for West Point.
Great. It's 1:47, so I've got a few more minutes. I'm really enjoying reading in the chat everybody's favorite trails and stories about how much everybody loves the Eno. I've certainly learned things. I hope more folks have too. Any progress extending the MST? I believe that's the
Mountains to Sea Trail.
Mountains to Sea Trail, thank you. From Pleasant Green access to Fuse Ford.
So from Pleasant Green access to Fuse Ford is waiting on one thing, and that's a bridge across the river. So currently it comes up on what we call the south side of the river. Now the river bends all different ways, so depending on where you are in the bend, is whether you're really on the south, north, east, or west. But we call it the south side. When you get to Pleasant Green into that parking lot, we had gotten, Eno River Association secured an easement for a trail bridge, another suspension bridge across from the parking lot to the other side so we could continue the trail. The reason we needed to do that is because if you go much farther than Pleasant Green, there's a row of 8 houses on the river. They're privately owned. Those aren't coming into any park system anytime soon. So there's a gap of private property. We needed to get on the other side, which is the park. The immediate opposite side is also a piece of private property, but they sold us a trail easement so we could put the trail over there and the bridge. And state parks actually allocated money for studying getting a design for this bridge. Well, then state parks heard that the Department of Transportation was going to replace the driving bridge over the river right there. And so in an effort to save money, they said, well, instead of us building a bridge, how about DOT builds a bridge with a sidewalk? And so they backed off their plans for putting that bridge in at this time. The estimated time from DOT for that bridge is 5 years. And, I'll leave you to figure out how quickly DOT really gets things done. But that's what's holding up the gap there from Pleasant Green to Fuse Ford.
Great. One more question. Why is the Eno a river instead of a creek?
Oh, boy, that's a great question. I have never been able to find a good definition. So if we were in the mountains of North Carolina, this might be considered a creek. Yet you can also go to the coast of North Carolina, the coastal plain, and find creeks. They're like a half a mile wide. So why is one a creek and one a river? I don't know. You might think it's being able to navigate it in a boat, but the Eno is so shallow that it's pretty tough. And then, like I said, those creeks down at the coast that are so huge and deep, you can get a boat down them easily. So I do not have an answer for that.
Good,
Any
thank you.
questions that I can handle now, or should I go on?
Please continue. You have 10 more minutes.
All right. Well, so I was talking about the Eno River Association and what we do. I mentioned Land Conservancy. We actually do get in some natural resource management. We do have staff and volunteers that work on that. We've done water quality monitoring in the past. We mostly just do it with our school kids now. But what we spend a lot of time on is exotic invasive plant eradication. So what I'm saying by that is that we've got plants that are from another country that have taken root here and are spreading and crowding out our native species. Usually they are not good host species or food species for our wildlife. And so we spend a lot of time, energy, and money, and most recently on trifoliate orange up around Hillsborough, trying to eradicate those plants. And we've got a lot of very dedicated volunteers. We're so blessed with that are working on it. But it's not always just plants. We are being threatened by a number of insects, like the emerald ash borer is one that's threatening our ash trees and is running like wildfire through them too. It can get interesting. As a ranger at the state park, I one time had to catch an iguana. And what was really sad is I'm carrying it down the road to get it into something to get to animal control. A couple of cars stopped and asked me if iguanas are native to North Carolina. I hope I'm not embarrassing anybody or pointing at you, but hopefully all of you understand iguanas are not native to North Carolina. That was a common problem, people releasing animals, and they still do in the parks. It took me a long time to understand the psychology, but actually they believe they're setting them free to live a happy life. I will tell you that iguana would not have made it through the winter. He was fun to catch. I had to throw a blanket over him and tackle him. The first time I grabbed him, I was trying to be gentle. You do not be gentle with iguanas. He shot out. He was a big thing. And he shot out of my arms and took off. I had to chase him down again. Next time I carried him like I had a football and I was heading for the goal line. I was not letting him go. But we do resource management. We do a lot of trash removal. Eno's a lot cleaner than it used to be, but as we had acquired lands over the decades, a lot of times they were just trash dumps. And we would haul away just dozens and dozens of truckloads of trash. We still do cleanup, but it's not near what we used to have to do. We recently participated in a mammal study where we spent 3 years moving a camera trap around for the Wildlife Commission so they could learn what wild mammals we have here on the Eno. And it was really cool to do that. We've helped with reforestation and Piedmont prairie wildflower planting down in the Penny's Bend area, Jenny, the place that you mentioned. And most recently put in a butterfly garden, a pollinator garden up at the Confluence Natural Area as a demonstration, and also, of course, to support the pollinator species up there. Other things we do, I want to put a plug in for the annual calendar, the Eno River calendar. The 50th calendar is on sale now, so we've been doing this for 50 years. It is a community tradition, it is an outreach, and it raises some money for us for our conservation efforts. If you haven't bought your Eno River calendar, please do so. They're on sale in a bunch of stores in the Triangle area or on the online Eno River store. And then we also are a formal support organization for the Eno River State Park and West Point on the Eno. Every park needs a private entity looking out for their interests because the government dollars just aren't there. So we provide volunteers, financial resources, we publicize their events, we publicize their needs, and we are an advocacy for the protection of their resources. And so we try to fill in that role and support those parks.
We had a bunch of more questions come in, if you don't mind. Any plans for a new state park visitor center?
Yes. So when the bond passed, the Connect NC bond passed a few years ago. I want to say, gosh, it's been more than a few years. It's amazing how long that's been going on. About 5 years ago, it included a visitor center for Eno River State Park. And that'll be over in the Fuse Ford access between the picnic area and the Piper Cox house. There was some flagging and surveying up for a while. Things have been moving kind of slowly, and COVID has not helped very much with that. We thought by now they would have broken ground. This was the year they were supposed to break ground. It will provide, it's not going to be the big visitor centers like you go to some of our state parks and see, because we still have the old office building, which they can now use for public education space and things like that. We'll have a small exhibit area, a visitor area, and a retail store. Here's what the park staff is most excited about. They're getting a whole bunch more parking spaces. If you have visited the Eno River State Park, especially during this, even before this COVID crisis, you realize that they don't have anywhere for people to park. They're just, it's incredible. When I was the superintendent of Eno River State Park, when I got there, we were seeing about 200,000 visitors a year, and we had about 2,000 acres. By the time I left in 2008, we had more than doubled, just a little more than doubled our visitation, over 400,000, and also had more than doubled our land and facilities, and we added more parking. And I thought when I left that place, I left it with plenty of parking. Then the 2007, 2008 economic crash happened. And, it was like an explosion of people looking for free stuff to do. And the parks, it was just phenomenal, the attendance. And then, of course, COVID made things worse. Well, they've had weekends at State Park now where they've had over 30,000 visitors in one weekend, 2 days. And they're seeing more than 800,000 visitors a year. So the park staff is just happy to get more parking spaces.
Kim asked, do you think it'll be necessary to close the trails again in coming months due to the pandemic? We hope not.
Yeah, we really hope not, because the outdoor activities are some of the safest things that people can do. People get a little worried around the parking lots and the restrooms become an issue. But people can choose, of course, to use the restrooms. There are lots of public trees in the state park. I have used the public trees many times. It does not hurt you. Just please get out of sight of the trail. There's nothing like being a park ranger and walking around patrolling trail and somebody's decided that the public tree is right beside the trail. Then you have to lecture a 30-year-old man about, where he should do things. So, but no, I don't think that will be the case. But we will, it's kind of hard to predict. They have been known to close down high use areas, which is why the Eno Quarry was closed down, because it was such a congregating place. They closed it down this summer.
Karen asked if you could talk about Fanny Breeze.
Sure. Fanny Breeze is actually buried in the church that I go to, have been a member of for a long time, Pleasant Green United Methodist Church. She was a slave to Samuel Breeze, who lived off of what's now Coal Mill Road. And he lived in a log cabin that was only taken down a few years ago. And so Fanny was a slave, and she became a midwife. And after emancipation, she continued with that occupation. She and her husband Samuel were sold 55 acres on the Eno. It's actually on the Cox Mountain Trail. If you walk, you'll go through the site there. The Eno River Association is working with a private individual and the park to actually set up an exhibit there on that spot. And she was so loved by the community because she was the one that you turned to. It didn't matter whether you were white, black, or Indian. She serviced everybody and birthing their babies and all kinds. And during that time, it was often that a midwife would come as you were preparing for birth to stay for several days. So the community really loved her. She was a member of Pleasant Green Church. She was the only African-American member at the time, during those times, post-Civil War. She did ask the church to allow more of her family to come there. And you can imagine that didn't sit well with all of the members. But what the church did cooperate with was finding land to create Mount Gilead Missionary Baptist Church, which is just a short distance from Pleasant Green, and establishing a church for the African Americans. And Fanny retained her membership in both. And she and her husband and one of her daughters are still buried. When she got buried, that's where she wanted her family, was at Pleasant Green, because she did love that group very much. But of course, it was a very different time. They lived there on the Eno for a long time. I believe it was after her husband died, though. She eventually moved with family to Hillsborough.
Great, thank you. This is a lot of education. We're coming up right on 2 o'clock, but I want to get to Wibb's question. And we can go a couple minutes over. I understand many of you will have to sign off at 2 o'clock. How can folks watching this presentation support the Eno River Association? And thanks, Dave, for a great talk.
Absolutely. And of course, that's what we always want to drive home. The job is not finished. A lot of people think we've saved the Eno, but there's still much more land to save, more than you can imagine. and many more threats always coming to the Eno. So we need everybody. The first thing is, we always need volunteers. So when the call comes out to do things, whether it's helping at the Eno River Festival or helping with land stewardship, helping with education programs, please volunteer. All of that's very important. When we come to needing the community to step up because something is threatening the river, when we need to talk to our elected officials, we need everybody to carry that Eno story to them. So that's another thing. In order to do the work we're doing, it's actually very expensive. So we look for people to make donations to it and memberships. And there are benefits to membership, and those benefits have been growing quite a bit as far as the special things that come with it. But we really need funding. We have grown into a staffed organization. So we started out as all volunteer, and we're that way for many decades. But as the work that we're doing grew and grew, and the volunteers decided we needed some staff to do that. It's expensive to have staff, but we accomplish a lot that way. But I'll tell you, we're still to this day without volunteers. We're not able to do anything. So volunteering, advocating, learning everything you can, donating to it, participating in the events, those are all things you can do to support the Eno.
Wonderful. We have a bonus question. Who was Nancy Rhodes?
Oh, see, somebody's trying to trick me right now.
Oh, no.
So this is referring to Nancy Rhodes Creek in the pump station access of Eno River State Park. And it's named after Nancy Rhodes. The trouble is, at the time it was named, there were 3 young women in the community named Nancy Rhodes. So the question has always been, which Nancy Rhodes is the creek named for? And anybody who knew took that to the grave with them. Nobody knows.
Well, good. There's more if you want to keep going, or we can wrap it up.
I'm good. If people want to keep asking questions, yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Were there villages along the Eno that we know about?
Yeah, if we're talking about Native American villages. So, first of all, I want to spell the root. Occoneechee Mountain, rumor that Occoneechee Mountain is where Indians lived. Indians wouldn't live there because it's not good farming land or anything like that. They probably visited it like we do and enjoyed looking off the high places, but that's it. The places that you find old village sites on the Eno would be good flat farmland areas. So the Oxbow in Hillsboro, which we do know from archaeology has multiple sites. But then as you get down further into past Roxborough Road, you enter a geology of the river called the Triassic Basin. Things get flatter. There's more, open floodplain territory, and further down into that area, you find more evidence of Indian villages down in there. Having said that, please know that on government lands is both there are state and federal laws that protect the artifacts that are there. You are not allowed to collect. I'd say if you incidentally find something like a spear point or an arrowhead or a pottery shard, you can either, if you know how to mark the location or GPS it, let the right officials know, or they're not going to complain too much if you bring it to them and tell them where you found it. But keeping it yourself is not permitted. What else have we got?
Last one. I keep saying that, and then people add questions. Do you know when we'll get an easement across private land to the quarry?
So they're referring to the Bacon Quarry, and that was the property I mentioned earlier that we helped the state park get in 2018. So it actually touches the state park like corner to corner. So if you sort of jump, you don't have to land on any private property. But the old Ridge Road to Roxborough, which is the common way to get there from the state park, does go across private property. Our land conservation specialist was working very hard to acquire that piece of land in between. There actually is part of a larger, more than 100-acre tract we'd like to acquire, and we did attempt to acquire. The owners initially were open to that, but then said, no, how about we just sell you about 25 acres right there so you can connect the park to the Bacon Quarry area. And we were working very hard on that and secured the funding for it. We have the money. And the landowners have recently, it's not they're trying to develop or anything, they've basically just told us they just don't want to deal with it right now. So we kind of have to respect that, but we're trying to maintain communications with them. So the answer is we thought it was going to happen very quickly, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen for a while. We do lead hikes to the Bacon Quarry. I've got one coming up in this month with a few more spaces left. You can go to our website to figure out how to register for that. But we have to get permission. We actually ask the landowner for permission to cross their property. We don't tell anybody they can just go do that.
Goodness, Karen, are there plans for trails to be established from Dumont Road to Holden Mill?
There are not. Obviously, and since you're aware that, of course, People's Feet kind of wear out a path down the Holden Mill, so there's a fairly well-established trail there. Dumont is what we call a neighborhood access. So a lot of people are familiar with the 5 big public access points to Eno River State Park, and then another one to Occoneechee Mountain. But in a bunch of our residential neighborhoods, there are trails that lead to the river that are maintained by the state park. Only one of those well, no, that's not true anymore since the Mountain Sea Trail. Only a few of them actually connect to a hiking trail, however. It's easy to say, let's just put in a trail. Trails are a lot of work. They're a lot of maintenance. We are not keeping up. When I say we, it's the park staffs at both West Point and the state park, the Eno River Association. We're constantly behind in the degradation of the trails and trying to deal with those. And until more resources available, you're going to find that most of those park managers are reluctant to add any more trails.
Great, thank you. I think we'll finally give you a break there. I'm looking forward to my next trip to Raleigh so I can drink some Eno River water, and would like to tell you all very sincerely thank you. And it is a beautiful day out there, and go take a hike.
That's
Dave,
exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome. Bye,
And thank you,
everybody.
everybody. Thanks for joining us today.